Please keep me. I can sew. I can give you sons too," she begged the haunted bounty hunter in Deadwood. Deadwood, Dakota Territory, 1876. The sun, a bruised and angry orange, bled across the horizon, painting the sky with the colors of a fresh wound. Below, the town of Deadwood was a festering scar on the earth, a place where the dust of 1,000 lost souls clung to every boot and coat. The air tasted of whiskey and regret, and the gnawing loneliness that had become my constant companion was a cold, hard stone lodged in the hollow of my chest. For years, I had been riding a long, desolate trail, each new town a grim reminder of the one I had left behind. A life of warmth and laughter I had traded for a ghost's existence. I was a man with no name, just a shadow on a tired horse, haunted by the memory of a wife whose laugh was now a silent echo in a quiet world, and a little girl whose hand had been too small for me to hold on to forever. I had nothing left to lose, not even the shame that should have burned in my gut from the things I had to do just to keep myself alive. I was sitting in the corner of the saloon, the only place in this cursed town where a man could find a few moments of forgetful peace. I didn't see him until he slid into the chair opposite me, his shadow falling over my whiskey. His voice, a low rasp, cut through the noise. "I've got a job for you, Cole. The kind of job that'll either get you rich or get you buried." I didn't look up, just took a slow sip of the cheap liquor. Another bounty, another life to take, another face to forget. This was my life now, a predictable cycle of violence and emptiness. I was ready to refuse, ready to retreat back into the hollow of my own solitude. But then he spoke again, and what he said next was a jolt of ice water that went straight to my heart. "It's about a little girl, my little girl." My hand, resting on the hilt of my pistol, tensed. My body, which had been numb for so long, suddenly felt a jolt of something I hadn't felt in years, a flicker of fear, a spark of hope. The man's words had landed like a bullet, hitting a part of me I thought was long dead. This wasn't just another bounty. This was a direct challenge to the quiet, dusty world I had built around my grief. I had a choice to make, one I had to make right now. I could stand up and walk away, leaving this man and his daughter to their grim fate, or I could, for the first time in a decade, stop running. I looked up, meeting his eyes, and with a voice that felt rusty from disuse, I asked, "What about her?" The hunt was on, and this time I wasn't just riding for a bounty. I was riding for a reason. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway to keep more Wild West love stories coming. My life, if you could call it that, had become a series of transactions. A life for a life, a coin for a sin. It was easier that way, to see everything in terms of dollars and cents, rather than the faces of the men I brought in, or the memories I tried so hard to bury. So when the notice went up on the saloon wall, I barely gave it a second glance. The usual. A reward for a bank robber named Silas Slick Miller, a man with a reputation for disappearing into the shadows like a wisp of smoke. But what caught my eye, what pulled me out of my weary numbness, was the small, barely legible note at the bottom. Sketches available from the witness, a woman known as Elara Vance, currently held at the Rusty Spade Saloon. The Rusty Spade was the heart of Deadwood's sickness. It was run by a man named Alistair Finch, a monster in a fine suit who dealt in human misery the way other men dealt in cards. He had a reputation for finding people with unique talents and exploiting them for profit, and the mention of a woman with a gift for sketching a bank robber told me everything I needed to know. Finch had her, and he wasn't going to let her go easily. The reward for Miller's capture was a handsome one, enough to let me drink my memories into oblivion for a month, maybe two. And if the sketches were as good as the notice claimed, they would be my best lead yet. I made my way through the dusty streets, the sun beating down on my hat like a hammer. The Rusty Spade was a two-story building of rough-hewn timber, its windows dark and unwelcoming. I spotted Finch immediately. He was sitting at a table in the back, a smug look on his face as he surveyed his kingdom. "Well, if it ain't Jack Cole," he said, his voice a low, oily rumble. Come to buy yourself a piece of merchandise? I ignored his taunt. The woman, I said, my voice low and flat. I need to see her. Finch's laugh was a wheezing, unpleasant sound. The woman? You mean the little bird who can draw like an angel? She ain't for sale, not to you anyway. She's far too valuable. He took a long drag from his cigar, blowing smoke into my face. But I hear you're looking for Silas Miller, and I hear you're good at what you do. I kept my eyes on him, saying nothing. He was playing a game, and I had no interest in playing along. I have something that might interest you, he continued, leaning forward. A drawing of Miller, so accurate it'll get you the bounty in half the time. And she's got more where that came from. A talent like that. It's a rare thing, don't you think? He gestured toward a small, roped-off area in the corner of the saloon. And there, sitting on a wooden crate, her hands tied loosely in front of her, was a woman. She was a vision in a world of decay, a splash of color in a world of dust and rust. Her dark hair was tangled, and her dress was stained, but she held herself with a quiet dignity that was impossible to miss. Her eyes, the color of a summer sky just before a storm, were fixed on me, not with fear, but with a burning defiance. It was as if she was daring me to see her as something more than just another piece of property to be bought and sold. I felt a pang of something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was a faint stirring of humanity, a flicker of light in the darkness I had lived in for so long. She wasn't just a commodity. She was a person who had seen things, endured things, and still, somehow, refused to break. I knew then that I couldn't just walk away with a drawing and leave her to this fate. This was a place where a woman's soul was not for sale, but for consumption. And this woman, this fragile, defiant woman, had a soul that was worth more than all the gold in Deadwood. The deal, I said, my voice cutting through the raucous noise of the saloon. What do I have to do to get her? Finch smiled, a cruel, triumphant grin that didn't reach his eyes. You don't just get her, Jack. You buy her. We're having a little auction, the drawing of Miller, and a chance at a fortune of your own, all for the highest bid. Don't worry. I've already set a ridiculously high reserve. But I'm sure for a bounty hunter like you, it's worth the price of a woman who can sew and give you sons too. He laughed, and the men around him joined in, their eyes moving over Alara, like they were vultures circling a dying animal. The thought of that disgusted me to my core. I looked at Alara, and she looked at me. Our eyes locked in a silent conversation. I saw her desperation, her fear, her defiance, and in her eyes, I saw an echo of my own loneliness. I knew that whatever happened next would determine not just her fate, but my own. I had come for a drawing, a piece of paper, but now I was fighting for something more. I was fighting for a chance at redemption, a chance to stop being a ghost and start being a man again. I was willing to pay any price to get her out of that hellhole, to get her away from the likes of Alistair Finch and his kind. By nightfall, the room went black, someone pulled the fire bell, a lamp crashed, and we were gone. A single night can feel like an eternity, especially when you're riding away from everything you've ever known. The dust of Deadwood still clung to us like a curse, coating our clothes, our hair, even our lungs with its bitterness. That place was behind us now, but its shadow seemed to ride with us, heavy and unwelcome. The silence between us was just as suffocating, weighted by the secrets we both carried, secrets too sharp and painful to put into words. We rode for hours without speaking. The only sounds were the creak of leather saddles, the faint jangle of bridles, and the rhythmic beat of our horses' hooves pounding against the hard-packed earth. I kept my gaze locked on the horizon, my fingers never straying far from the worn handle of my revolver. Out here, in the endless wilderness of the West, danger could rise from behind a rock, a canyon wall, or even the sky itself. But I wasn't worried about the land. My concern was men. Finch's men. Finch was not the kind of man who let go of what he thought belonged to him. He saw Alara as merchandise, a rare jewel worth more than any gold nugget pulled from the Black Hills. To him, she wasn't a woman with a voice, with dreams, with a life of her own. She was property, and he was the kind of man who would burn the whole prairie down just to get her back. Alara rode beside me, her posture straight and proud despite the exhaustion weighing on her, Her presence was like a quiet flame in the night, steady but fragile. She was a woman of cities and art, someone whose hands had been made for brushes and canvas, not reins and pistols. The brutal, unforgiving expanse of the frontier had no mercy for people like her. Yet there she was, matching my pace, her chin lifted as if defying the very land itself. I found myself wondering what she thought of me. Did she see me as her savior, the man who had bought her freedom at the auction block? Or did she see me as just another captor, one who had simply traded gold instead of chains? I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that our connection was nothing more than circumstance, that this was a business arrangement, a means to an end. But every time I looked at her, every time I saw the mix of fear and determination in her eyes, the lie weighed heavier on my soul. "He will send men after us," she said at last, her voice breaking the silence. It was soft, almost a whisper, but steady, carrying no illusions. "I know," I replied, my tone rough and clipped. "They'll be here soon. We need to make it to the canyons before dawn." Avru. I had been a cavalry scout for years before I became a bounty hunter, and the land was an old acquaintance of mine. The canyons, with their twisted passages of rock and shadow, were the perfect refuge. A man could vanish there for days, even weeks, if he knew the trails well enough. I prayed my memory of the terrain was sharp enough to outwit Finch's hired killers. As the sun began its slow descent, the horizon lit up in defiant streaks of orange, purple, and blood red. It was a sky that felt almost like a warning. A painter's last stroke before night consumed everything. When we reached a secluded creek, our horses, bone-weary and thirsty, bent their heads eagerly to drink. I slid off my saddle and offered Ilara a hand. For a brief moment, her small palm rested against mine. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a strange jolt through me, like lightning striking a dead tree, sparking something long thought, lost. She was unlike any woman I had known on the frontier. The saloon girls hardened by whiskey and despair, the widows clinging to survival, the desperate mothers pulling wagons west, none of them were like her. Ilara carried fragility and strength in equal measure, a flower blooming stubbornly in a garden of thorns. "We will rest here," I said, stripping the saddles from the horses with practiced ease. "Eat and drink. The night will be long." I handed her dried jerky and my canteen. She accepted both, her gaze lingering on me in the firelight. "Why did you do it?" she asked finally, her tone cautious but curious. "You didn't have to pay all that gold. You could have just taken the sketches and left." The flames crackled as I stared into them, the memories of my past swirling like smoke. "That's what I came for," I admitted, the words heavy on my tongue. "But when I saw you, I couldn't. I didn't know how to explain the feeling. It wasn't pity. It wasn't duty. It was something deeper, stranger, like finding a spark in the ashes of a long-dead fire." She had stood on that platform, eyes defiant despite the chains. That fire reminded me of the man I had once been. "I saw something in you," I continued, my voice quieter now. "A woman who refused to break. The same fire I used to have." My throat tightened as the old grief surfaced. "I lost everything once. My wife, my daughter. A fever took them both, left me with nothing but a rifle and a thirst for vengeance. Hate kept me alive, but it's an empty life." Ilara's expression softened. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and touched my arm. Her fingers were gentle, but her words struck like a hammer against the walls I had built. "You're not empty, Jackson, just broken, like a piece of art that's shattered but can still be pieced back together." He swallowed hard. No one had spoken to me like that in years, not with pity, not with fear, but with understanding. She wasn't looking at the bounty hunter, the scarred man with a gun. She was looking at Jackson, the man who had once loved, who had once lived. "Tell me about your art," I said suddenly, desperate to shift the weight of the conversation. She smiled then, a small, wistful smile that softened her face in the firelight. "My father was a diplomat. We traveled across oceans, through grand cities and quiet villages. He always told me the most beautiful things weren't in palaces or museums, but in the faces of the people we met, in the stories their eyes carried." She paused, her gaze distant. "I paint not just what I see, but what I feel, the joy, the sorrow, the loneliness. Out here in the West, I thought I would find inspiration, a story worth telling, and I did. Just not the one I expected. No." Her voice trembled slightly, and I knew she was thinking of the ambush, the bandits, and the cruel fate that had nearly ended her story on an auction block. Yet even in her pain, she spoke with hope, with resilience. Elara saw the world not in black and white, predator and prey, but in shades of color I had long forgotten existed. "We need to move," I said after a long silence, the practical side of me shoving down the warmth she had kindled. "They'll be hunting us before the stars fade." We mounted again and rode into the night. The prairie stretched before us, endless and silent except for the steady rhythm of our horses. The sky glittered with stars, indifferent to the struggles of men and women below. And yet, for the first time in years, I didn't feel entirely alone. As the hours dragged on, I found my eyes straying to Elara more often. I began to see her not just as someone to protect, not just as a responsibility bought with gold, but as something else, someone who could stand beside me, not behind me. She was clever, asking sharp questions about the land, noticing details most tenderfoots would have missed. She was resourceful too, rationing water, adjusting her saddle without complaint, refusing to let weakness show. She was no longer the helpless captive I had pulled from Deadwood. She was proving, mile by mile, that she could endure this cruel land. And with each passing moment, I began to wonder if perhaps I wasn't just carrying her to safety, perhaps she was carrying me too, in her own way. We were two broken souls, bound not by chains or bargains, but by the unspoken understanding of loss and survival. She had lost her freedom, her dreams. I had lost my family, my fire. And yet, together, riding beneath the indifferent stars, we were forging something fragile and invisible, a thread of connection, stretched thin but unbreakable. For the first time in many years, I felt the faint stirrings of something I thought had died with my wife and daughter: hope. And though Finch's men would come, though the night promised danger and blood, I held on to that fragile thread, praying it would not snap before dawn. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from so I don't feel so alone out here. We rode for 3 more days, the chase growing hotter with every passing hour. The horizon behind us seemed to burn with the fury of pursuit, and though the land stretched wide and endless, I could feel Finch's men closing in as surely as if they were breathing down our necks. They were like wolves, relentless, tireless, unforgiving, tracking our every move across the plains. I knew the tricks of this game. I knew the hidden trails, the dry creek beds, the places where a man could vanish without a trace. But Finch's men weren't greenhorn. They were seasoned, skilled, and determined, and worst of all, they knew me. They knew how I thought, the moves I was likely to make, and the traps I would set. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse, and one mistake, just one, would decide who lived and who ended up bleeding into the dust. By the time we reached the canyons, both our horses were lathered in sweat, their sides heaving from the long push. The place rose before us like some ancient fortress carved by gods and forgotten by time. Wind and water had spent 1,000 years shaping those walls of stone, twisting them into a labyrinth of shadows and echoes. The air there was cooler, touched by the whisper of hidden springs, and the sound of our horses' hooves echoed back at us like ghosts of old cavalry patrols. I led us deep into that maze, past narrow passages where the rock walls pressed so close we had to ride single file, past a hidden waterfall spilling into a pool clear as glass. The sound of rushing water was soothing after so many days of pursuit, and I watched Elara's face as she drank it in. Her features were streaked with dirt and exhaustion, but her eyes widened in wonder. At last, we entered a secluded valley, invisible from the outside world, a place I had found years ago while scouting with the cavalry. Few men knew of it, and I had always sworn to keep it for myself, a secret sanctuary carved into the bones of the earth. But as I looked at Elara, I knew I had made the right choice in bringing her here. "We're safe for now," I said as I swung down and helped her dismount. My voice was rough with fatigue, but steady. They won't find us here. This is a place where a man can disappear from the world." She turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. The canyon walls rose high overhead, sealing us in a natural fortress. The sky was a thin strip of blue above, and the waterfall's song filled the valley with a gentle rhythm. "It's beautiful," she breathed, her voice tinged with awe. "It feels like another world entirely." For the first time in days, some of the tension in her shoulders eased. We made camp near the pool, the firelight reflecting on the stone walls like flickering spirits. Over the next few days, we lived in a fragile sort of peace. I hunted mule deer and rabbits, bringing back meat for us both, while Ilara surprised me in ways I hadn't expected. She had an artist's eyes, sharp and observant, and that gift translated to survival in the wild. She spotted edible roots and berries before I did, pointed out trails of game I had missed, and even knew which herbs to use for cooking and for treating scratches and sores. Her delicate hands, which I had once thought belonged only to paintbrushes and parchment, proved capable and steady as she tended the fire, dressed game, and patched the wear in our saddlebags. She adapted quickly, as though some hidden strength had been waiting all along to rise in her. Watching her move about the camp, I felt a strange mixture of pride and unease. She belonged to no man's chains, not Finch's, not mine. She was proving, day by day, that she could stand on her own against this unforgiving land. But deep down, I knew the peace couldn't last. It was an illusion, as fragile as smoke in the wind. One morning, as dawn broke across the canyon rim, I climbed the rocks to scout. The valley was quiet, the sky painted in pale streaks of gold. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope, but then I saw them. Finch's men. They were a handful of hard-eyed killers, camped at the canyon's mouth like vultures waiting for a dying beast to fall. Even from that distance, I recognized their posture alert, restless, hungry for blood. They were trackers, every one of them, and they were determined. My stomach turned cold. The game was on again. I returned to camp, my boots crunching on loose gravel, my mind already racing through possibilities. Ilara looked up from the fire, reading the answer in my face before I even spoke. "They're here," I said, the words like iron in my mouth. "They've found us." Her face went pale, but not weak. That fire I had first seen in her eyes on the auction block, when she refused to break, was there again. "What do we do?" she asked. Her voice did not shake. I had prepared for this moment. I had set traps, hidden tripwires, and planned routes through the narrowest passages. It wasn't much, but it was something. "I'll draw them in," I told her, tightening my grip on the rifle. "Lead them through the narrows. Their numbers won't matter in tight spaces. You stay here, near the fire. If it goes wrong, you run." But Ilara's hand shot out, gripping my arm. "No," she said, her voice fierce. Her eyes locked with mine, blazing with defiance. "You won't face them alone. I won't let you. I can help. I'll watch your back." I froze. For years I had lived like a lone wolf, trusting no one but myself. To rely on another person, especially her, felt dangerous. Yet in her eyes, I saw no fear, only loyalty and courage. She wasn't asking. She was telling me she would stand with me, no matter the cost. I couldn't deny her. Not anymore. The first shot rang out just past midday, echoing like thunder through the stone halls of the canyon. I crouched behind a jagged boulder, my rifle trained on the narrow entrance. A burly brute with a scar over his eye crept forward, his pistol raised. I squeezed the trigger, and he dropped with a grunt. Then the others poured in, guns blazing. The canyon erupted into chaos, the sound of lead striking stone, the acrid smell of powder filling the air. I moved like a shadow, slipping from rock to rock, striking fast and vanishing before they could pin me down. My traps caught 2 men, snapping ropes and hidden pits, buying us precious seconds. But they were relentless, pressing closer with each passing moment. A cry pierced the gunfire. I spun around, and my blood ran cold. One of Finch's men, a wiry weasel with a cruel smile, had found Ilara. He had his arm wrapped around her, his pistol aimed squarely at my chest. "Drop it, Jack," he snarled, "or the lady gets a bullet in the head." For the first time in years, I felt true panic. I was cornered, trapped, helpless. But then Alara did something I hadn't expected. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. Instead, she drew in a sharp breath, and with her free hand, she pulled a shard of sharpened flint from her pocket. In one swift motion, she slashed across his hand. The man howled, his grip loosening. I fired. The shot echoed like judgment, and the man dropped lifeless to the canyon floor. Alara stumbled free, her hands shaking, her face pale but resolute. She ran to my side just as the last of the gunfire faded into silence. I looked down and realized blood was streaming down my own arm, torn open by a grazing bullet. The pain burned hot, but Alara's face was steady as she tore a strip from her dress and bound the wound with firm, practiced hand. "You saved my life," I rasped, stunned not just by her courage, but by her strength. "You risked everything." She met my gaze, her eyes shining with a mixture of fire and tenderness. "We're in this together, Jackson," she said quietly but firmly. "We face this together." And in that moment, something inside me shifted. This wasn't about gold anymore, or debts, or even survival. This wasn't a rescue. This wasn't a transaction. It was something else, something fragile and dangerous and real. A bond forged in the crucible of blood and fire. We stood together in that canyon, surrounded by silence and the bodies of the men who had hunted us. I knew then what Alara already understood. There was no going back. Not to Deadwood, not to the lives we had left behind. Whatever came next, it would be together. We would ride north, away from the ashes of our pasts, into lands unknown, searching for peace and freedom in a world that offered little of either. But we would search together, and for the first time in years, I believed it was possible. Hey there, friend, take a moment and get yourself a full glass of water. It's easy to forget, but staying hydrated is crucial for your health. Also, if you've been sitting for a while, do a quick lap around the room and give your eyes a break from the screen. Your body will thank you. The canyons, once a sanctuary, now felt more like a prison. Their high stone walls, which had sheltered us from the eyes of Finch's men, now loomed above with an oppressive weight. The bounty hunters were gone for now. Their bodies, the echoes of gunfire, and the smell of blood had been swallowed by the desert wind. But we both knew it was only a matter of time before more came. Finch would never let go. He would keep sending men until one of them returned with Alara or with my head. We couldn't stay. We had to move, and we had to move fast. Our destination, the unforgiving north. Beyond the prairies and hills lay a land of snow and mountains, where winter carved the earth into an endless maze of white. Few men dared to settle there. It was harsh, merciless, and deadly. But it was also empty, and in its emptiness, there was safety. I knew the journey would test us in ways we could hardly imagine: blizzards, starvation, treacherous trails, but it was our only chance. So, we rode. Days stretched into weeks, the landscape shifting like scenes in a cruel theater. The dusty plains gave way to rolling hills, then forests of pine, and finally to the snow-draped peaks of the high country. The air grew colder with every mile, biting at our lungs, turning our breath into clouds of frost. At night, the stars burned brighter against the black sky, sharp and pitiless as a hunter's blade. Alara surprised me every step of the way. A woman of cities, raised on art and diplomacy, she endured the hardships of the trail with a resilience that humbled me. She braved the freezing nights without complaint, rode long hours through the mountains without faltering, and met each day's uncertainty with quiet strength. Wrapped in furs too large for her frame, she looked fragile, almost out of place against the raw wilderness, but her spirit was iron. She was a warrior in a dress, her resolve as strong as any man I had ridden with in the cavalry. One evening, after a long day of pushing through snow that reached our horses' bellies, we made camp in a crude shelter of pine branches and hides. The wind howled outside like a pack of wolves, its icy breath sneaking through every gap in our meager walls. We huddled close beside the fire, the flames barely strong enough to hold back the cold. It was then, in that fragile bubble of warmth against the frozen night, that I found myself speaking of my past. Words I had kept buried for years spilled out. I told her of Clara, my wife, whose laugh had once been the music of my days, and of Sarah, our little girl with eyes as blue as spring skies. I told her about the fever that swept through our town, stealing them both in a single cruel week, leaving me in a house that echoed with silence. I told her how I had become a ghost after that, wandering battlefields and backwater towns, a hollow man driven only by vengeance and survival. The words burned as they left my throat, heavy as stones I had carried too long. But with Ilara, they came easier than I expected, as if she had been waiting to hear them all along. I thought I would never be whole again, I confessed, staring into the fire until the flames blurred in my vision. I thought a part of me died with them, that I was doomed to walk this earth as nothing more than a shell, a ghost haunting a world that no longer had a place for me. In the flicker of the firelight, her hand found mine. Her fingers were cold, but the touch carried warmth deeper than any flame. "You're not a ghost, Jackson," she whispered, her voice steady, filled with a conviction I couldn't muster for myself. "You're a man who is healing. Healing takes time. It's not a destination you arrive at. It's a journey, and you don't have to walk it alone anymore." Her words pierced through the armor I had worn for years. For the first time since Clara and Sarah's graves faded behind me, I allowed myself to believe. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living again. And more than that, I was falling in love, slowly, inevitably, with the woman beside me. She had seen me at my worst, had walked through blood and snow with me, and still she chose to stay. A week later, the first snowstorm struck. At first it was beautiful, a gentle fall of white that covered the land in silence, softening the world into something almost pure. But beauty in the high country always carried danger. The storm grew, the flakes thickening into a blizzard that howled with a fury unmatched by gunfire. The wind cut like knives, driving snow into our faces, stealing our breath. The world shrank to a white void where we couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Our horses stumbled through drifts that swallowed their legs, their bodies trembling with exhaustion. My hands were numb on the reins, my rifle frozen to its sling. I knew the truth: we couldn't last much longer. If we kept going, the storm would kill us. We would die out here, two broken souls turned into statues of ice. "Ilara!" I shouted over the wind, my voice raw. Her cry came back, faint but fierce. "Jackson!" She was pointing, her arm trembling with the effort. Through the swirling snow, I saw it, a dark shadow against the mountainside. A cave. We staggered toward it, every step a battle. By the time we stumbled inside, collapsing onto the frozen stone floor, my body was numb, my breath shallow. The storm raged outside, a furious monster clawing at the mouth of the cave. But inside we had shelter. Ilara managed to get a fire going, her hands shaking but steady enough to spark life into dry twigs I had carried in a pouch. Flames leapt up, pushing back the cold. We sat pressed together, wrapped in blankets and furs, feeding the fire with every scrap of wood we could gather. In that flickering light, I saw her face, pale, lips cracked, hair tangled from days of wind and snow. And yet, her eyes shone with a light that banished the darkness. She smiled, a trembling but triumphant smile, and a tear slipped down her cheek. "We made it," she whispered. Her voice carried both relief and wonder. "We made it." "Oh?" Then she drew in a breath, as if gathering every ounce of courage she had. Her eyes found mine, and in them I saw fear, hope, and something deeper. "Jackson," she said softly, her voice breaking, "I have something to tell you. I'm pregnant." The words struck me like a thunderclap. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My heart, long a cold stone inside my chest, suddenly pounded with a wild, frantic rhythm. Pregnant, a child, a son or daughter waiting to be born into this brutal world. My thoughts flashed back to Clara and Sarah, to the laughter that had once filled my home, to the graves I had left behind. For so long I had believed that part of my life was over, that I would never know it again. And yet here, in the arms of a woman I had met on a filthy auction block, life had found me once more. I reached for her, pulling her into my arms. She pressed her face against my chest, her tears dampening my shirt, and I held her as tightly as I dared. The storm outside roared on, furious and unending, But inside that cave, I felt something stronger than fear. Hope. We were alone, trapped in a cave with a storm that could last for days, maybe weeks. The fire was small, our supplies limited, and my body still bore wounds from the battle in the canyon. But none of that mattered. Not anymore. Because we weren't just running from death. We were running toward life. In the glow of the firelight, I found myself reaching for charcoal and scraps of parchment Alara had carried. My hands, scarred and clumsy from years of violence, began to move with a forgotten purpose. I sketched Clara's smile, Sarah's small hands. The memories I thought too painful to face, I began to draw, piece by piece, as if the act of shaping them onto paper could heal something inside me. And Alara, watching me with tired but tender eyes, tended the fire, mended my bandages, and pressed her hands against her belly with quiet reverence. She wasn't a replacement for the family I had lost. No. She was something far greater. She was the woman who had shown me that healing was possible, that broken men could still find love, that ghosts could find flesh again. She was the beginning of a future I had never dared to dream, and as the storm raged outside, I whispered a vow to myself. Whatever trials awaited us in the north, whatever dangers or losses, I would fight them all. For her, for our child, for the fragile but unbreakable hope that had taken root in the darkness of a cave. If you're watching on TV, don't hesitate, grab your phone and hit subscribe to my channel so you'll never miss out on our amazing characters. The winter in that cave was the longest and most profound journey of my life. Outside, the world was a white, silent wasteland. Inside, a new world was being born. The fire was our sun, and the stone walls of the cave were our fortress. Alara, with her painter's eye, saw beauty in the dancing shadows and the ancient carvings on the stone. I, a man of violence and a thirst for gold, began to see the world through her eyes. I learned to sketch, my calloused hands awkward at first as I tried to capture the grace of her face in the firelight. But with each stroke of charcoal, a part of my soul that had been dormant for so long began to awaken. I started with simple things, a mountain peak, a bird in flight, but soon, I found myself sketching the memories I had tried to bury. My wife's smile, my daughter's laugh. It was painful, but it was also a kind of healing. I was finally letting myself remember, and in remembering, I was letting go. Alara watched me, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. She knew I wasn't replacing my past. I was simply learning to live with it, to carry the memory of my loved ones, not as a burden, but as a source of strength. The snow finally melted, and we emerged from the cave like people reborn. The world was a vibrant tapestry of green and gold, the scent of fresh earth filling the air. Alara was due soon, and we knew we had to find a safe place for her to give birth. We resumed our journey north, no longer as fugitives, but as a family with a purpose. The road was hard, but our love for each other, and the promise of a new life, gave us the strength to endure. We were no longer running from the past. We were riding toward a future. We found a new town, a new kind of town, far from the reach of Deadwood and the likes of Alistair Finch. It was a community built on a shared dream of freedom and a life without prejudice. There were people of all kinds here, from all walks of life, all united by the same desire for a second chance. We settled in, and a few weeks later, Alara gave birth to our son, a strong, healthy boy with her gentle eyes and my stubborn spirit. We named him Hope. If you've made it this far, I know you're a true fan of WWL. From the bottom of my heart, I wish your day is filled with health and happiness, and may a little stroke of luck find you in the next 15 minutes. Don't forget to share it with me in the comments. Hope, our son, was the perfect symbol of our journey, a living testament to our cowboy love stories. He was the future that had seemed impossible just a few months ago. A beautiful, perfect future that had grown from the ashes of a tragic past. I had lost everything once, but I had found so much more. I had found a family. I had found love. And most of all, I had found myself. I was no longer a ghost haunting a desolate landscape, but a man with a purpose, a future, and a heart full of Wild West love. My Wild West love story was not over. It was just beginning. It was not a grand tale of fame and fortune, but a quiet cowboy love story of two lost souls who found each other in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of the American West. Today's story is about pains that seemed to have no way out until a small ray of light changed everything. Do you believe that, even in the darkest times, there's always a miracle waiting at the end of the road? And if deep down you still believe that God is watching over you, quietly arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment, AMEN, below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write it, a blessing may quietly find its way into your life.